All right, this is Polynomials Day 8, and they're talking about something called the zero product property rule. And what the zero product property rule tells you, if you have A times B equals 0, then you know either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. One of those has to be true in order for this product to be 0. And so you're going to use this zero product property rule to solve some polynomial equations. So the first example they give you is n minus 7 times n plus 1 equals 0. So this is sort of like saying A times B equals 0. And so we know either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0 in order for the product to be 0. So you can say, well, then I know that n minus 7 has to equal 0 or n plus 1 has to equal 0. Well, now that I have two equations, I can solve this. So if I add 7 to both sides here, I know that n has to equal 7, or, and here if I subtract 1 from each side, I would know n has to equal -1. Remember that it's or, not and, because it's this or this. It can't be both together at the same time. So n equals 7 or n equals -1. They give you another example here where they have a couple more things. They have a greatest common factor n that was taken out times 2n plus 3 and n minus 5 equals 0. Remember that it has to equal 0 in order to solve it. If it was just like this, you couldn't actually solve it because it's an expression, not an equation. But they give it to you as an equation. So now you actually have three things. So it's sort of like saying A times B times C equals 0. So once again, you know, either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0 or C has to equal 0. So as many things that you have multiplied together, you're going to set each one of those equal to 0. So I can say, well, either n equals 0 by setting that one equal to 0, or 2n plus 3 has to equal 0, or n minus 5 has to equal 0. So now I have three separate equations. Well, this one's already solved, so I know n equals 0 is one of my solutions. If I want to subtract 3 from both sides here, I'll have 2n equals -3. To solve this, I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and I have n equals -3 over 2. Whoops, I have two equal signs here instead of a minus. And so I have n minus 5 equals 0. So if I add 5 to both sides, I have n equals 5. So now you know the solution to this equation is either 0 or -3 over 2 or 5. That's your solution set. And let's see. They give you a couple more examples. Here they give you one where you have to factor it out first. So you have 4x squared plus 12x equals 0. So now this one's not factored for you. So you have an extra step here. You have to factor it first before you apply the zero product property rule. So once again, in order to factor it, you're going to look at your numbers, 4 and 12, and say, what is the greatest common factor I can take out of here? Well, I can take out a 4. Then you're going to look between x squared and x, and you can take out an x. Well, when I take 4x squared and divide it by 4x, I'm going to be left with just an x. And when I take 12x and divide it by 4x, I'm going to be left with a 3. If I multiplied this back, I'd get 4x squared plus 12x, so then you know that that's correct. By the zero product property rule, I know that 4x has to equal 0, or x plus 3 has to equal 0. Now that I have my two equations, I can solve this separately. I can divide both sides by 4, and anything 0 divided by anything will be 0. Or if I subtract 3 from both sides, I'll get x equals -3. You should notice that if I have a quadratic equation, so squared here, I'll have 2 answers. When I had a cubic equation or a 3 there, I had 3 answers. If I had an x to the 4th, I should have 4 answers, and so forth. So I think that probably gives you enough information. If you have any questions, let me know.